Hi, everybody. The payroll industry as a whole is nowhere near as efficient as it could and as I believe it really should be. There is still far too much mess, far too much complexity, and far too many manual processes and things that we could do so much better. I'm going to talk to you today about the lean payroll, and I'm going to bring to you, if this works, can you move on to the next slide? I'm going to talk to you about, there we go, it's working now. What is lean payroll? I'm also going to say why this matters. And I think the key thing here is I'm going to try and keep it simple. I'm going to give you four key questions. It's amazing, I can do a lot of things, I can't count to four. 4 key questions that you can ask your own businesses and yourselves so that you can try to work out how you can make your processes more efficient. You're not going to get a cookbook that guides you through every single step. You won't learn everything that there is to know about this subject, but you are going to get some really simple tips that guide you through this. So, what is lean? So lean actually comes from the manufacturing industry. It was born out of Japan in the 1950s and in the 1960s. And even today, the 3 most reliable car brands in this country are Japanese cars because of the principles that they have applied with lean and in the way they manufacture things. And there is nobody who does it better. Now, why do we want to borrow from manufacturing? Surely there's not that much we can learn from them. Well, I want to just give you some really interesting stats that I have dug out from various research things. So, manufacturing over the last roughly 40 years has got 3% more productive every single year. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but over that 40-year period, that means they are 3.6 times more productive. And you can see in various things like microchips, that will be many thousands of times more productive. What's the equivalent number for services? And payroll would come into that sort of service sector. The number is 1%. And by comparison, that means we've got 1.5 times more productive on average. So that productivity gap is absolutely enormous. If you just imagined what it would be like if all the service industry was getting as productive at the same rate as manufacturing, we would probably be flying people to Mars and back again by now. You know, we'd be able to do astonishing things and we'd be able to achieve phenomenal results. So I want to talk about ways that we can start to get there. But I guess you might be asking, why is some techie guy going to be an expert in manufacturing processes and lean? Well, I think that's a fair question. I'm going to introduce you to a concept of DevOps, and we're not going to talk about this, but DevOps is basically lean inside software development. It's a whole movement that started happening around 20, 25 years ago and has culminated in some really impressive results. So what has it actually achieved and why is that important? Well, 20 odd years ago, this was a really normal thing. And actually, even at Cintra, only about 3.5, 4 years ago, this was very normal. 2 to 3 deployments a year. It says developments, I meant deployments. So 2 or 3 deployments per year. And actually, what that has changed to is 10 deployments per day. That's exactly what we're doing on our Cintra Cloud product now. So that is actually a 1,000-fold increase in deployments into production systems. And consequently, the systems are more scalable, they're more stable, and we have developers focusing on writing code, not fixing bugs, not dealing with issues, not worrying about how am I going to transfer a file from here to here. I'm sure people in payroll are familiar with how do I transfer a file from here to here kind of problems. All of those things disappear because you spend the time and the energy to make these things efficient. And you follow a set of really simple processes, and you can achieve that. And I think payroll has a real structural weakness in the way we do things today. I don't think it will continue like this forever, but I call it the payroll bottleneck. So essentially, you spend most of the month with, and this is not completely true of all organizations, but most payrolls say if it's a monthly payroll, you're going to have a large period of time where you do a little bit of work. And you do a lot of catch-up and other things. But then you're going to have a short period of time from when you lock the payroll to when you need to pay people when you have to do an awful lot of activities. So behind me is just a number of the activities. It's an example. I'm sure some of you do more, some of you do less, but these are the sorts of activities that need to be done in, depending on how efficient you are and what you're trying to achieve, in a sort of 7-day period. And this is a vast number of activities, and it's a structural problem that means becoming really good and really efficient in these things can be fundamental and completely change the way you run your payroll systems and the way you run your payroll process. There will be lots of fun outcomes at the end of that, but I think you start with, let's break the problem down and we can achieve something. So I want to go a little bit more into lean and what that really means. And there are 3 concepts I'm going to talk to you about today. There's a lot more to this subject than this, but I think these 3 concepts, if you learn nothing else, these will be really valuable things for you to remember and for you to challenge yourself on. So the key 3 lean concepts are uneven work. So uneven work is where things don't come in at the same rate every time. Payroll bottleneck, perfect example. Overburden. A machine or a person is doing too much work in too short a period of time. Overburden leads to mistakes. And waste. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail on each one of these things now. So uneven work. We all know the saying, you wait half an hour for a bus and then 3 come along all at once, right? That is the perfect example of uneven work. I'm going to just work through that a little bit with you because I think it's a really interesting case study. Because actually the unevenness in the outcome is completely disproportionate to the unevenness of what came in. So imagine that you have 3 buses and they're supposed to come every 10 minutes. In London, that's a reasonable assumption. And the first bus leaves on time, the second bus leaves, say, 3 minutes late, and the third bus leaves on time. Well, what happens is that the first bus just carries on as normal. The second bus is going to have more passengers, right, because it left late. So it's going to go slower. The third bus, which left on time, is going to go quicker because it's got fewer passengers because the gap between it and the second bus is much smaller. So naturally, you have a very small variation. I left 2 or 3 minutes late. What difference can that make? Halfway through the route, those 2 buses are neck to neck. And then probably the bus behind it starts catching them both up, and that's where you end up with 3 or 4 buses all coming at once. And I think that's a really clear illustration of how uneven work coming in, even in small variations, can lead to massively disproportionate outcomes. So a large part of what we have to do is work out how do we even out the work. So think about that list of everything I showed in the payroll bottleneck. What of those things could you take outside the payroll bottleneck and do before? Data collection, data entry, data gathering are really key candidates for that. But you want to ask yourself, how can I even up my work? That's absolutely vital because, again, uneven work leads to overburden. Because now, all of a sudden, I've got everything happening all at once and I'm in trouble. And that's exactly what happens in those situations because now you have a payroll manager or a payroll administrator who has to do a huge amount in a really short period of time. And during that period, they might be working 12 or 13 hours a day. What difference does that make? It doesn't matter. You can just work a little bit of overtime, catch it up earlier in the next month, and that's fine, right? But no, what happens with overburden is mistakes. Mistakes come in because you're not automatons. You're not something that can run at 100%. And actually, another part of overburden is to think about what capacity should you be running at, right? Everyone always thinks, oh, we want to be 100% capacity because then we're efficient. But you forget about the law of Murphy, and Murphy exists, right? Things go wrong. And if you are running at 100% capacity, you have zero ability to deal with those things without generating overburden. And overburden is a massive source of error. And errors are a key part of waste. So waste in lean actually has about 7 or 8 different things that it goes into, but I'm going to talk about just a couple of them. So errors is one of the biggest form of waste because errors cause rework. That means doing the same thing you've already done. So you have to really think carefully about how do I make sure I get it right the first time? Because if you can get something right the first time, you dramatically reduce the amount of work. So a really good example of how we've achieved some of those things, for our outsourced customers, they used to send us files. We would then process those files, and then we'd say, oh, this number you put in here, instead of saying £1,000 for a salary, it says bananas. What do you mean? And now you can upload that file directly yourself, and you get the feedback instantly. You fix it, and you move forward. And we've eliminated a huge amount of rework and waste as a result. And another form of waste that you really want to be aware of is waiting. So people don't think of waiting as a problem. But again, I want to use a manufacturing analogy for this. You go to DFS and you order a sofa. And they say it's a 3.5-month waiting time for that sofa, right? Well, what are you actually waiting for? How long does it genuinely take somebody to build a sofa? Well, if it went on each one of the steps consecutively, it's probably around 4 hours of work. So you wait 3.5 months for 4 hours of work. Why is that? That's because of all the waste throughout their manufacturing system. That means they don't just jump on the project, do it all right the way through, get it done and push it out the door. So we all need to think of our payroll systems as manufacturing lines with steps in them and waste processes. And you want to make sure that nobody is ever waiting for anything, because that is a huge symptom of problems and waste, and it magnifies anything that goes wrong, gets magnified by those waiting times. So there's just a couple of key areas I want you to be aware of waste. So these concepts seem quite simple. So why is it that it's been so hard for services businesses to adopt this and to improve? And I believe that there's one key fundamental difference between manufacturing businesses and service businesses that make it much harder for service businesses to do this. And that is visibility of work. So this is what a manufacturing plant looks like when you've got waste. You can see boxes stacked up everywhere. You've got inventory all over the shop. If there was people in here, you would see people walking from one corner of the warehouse to another carrying things. And you could stand above and watch the manufacturing floor and go, why is that person traveling from there to there? Why are all those boxes over there? And it becomes really obvious and really easy to spot those things. And it then becomes much easier to solve those problems. But what does it look like if your payroll process is inefficient? Something like this. One person feeling stressed, feeling out of their depth, feeling anxious. But no one knows whether that's because the payroll process is broken, whether because their dog just died, or whether they're just feeling hungry, right? It could be anything. And so therefore, the symptoms are much harder to diagnose because you can't see what's going on. So a key part of what we have to do is we have to make our work visible in payroll. In development, we do this by using something called a Kanban board. So Kanban board, lifted and shifted from manufacturing, again, same terminology. A really good example of a free tool that you can use is Trello. So you put all your tickets into a board and you track them across various steps. And what you can then do, you can do really intelligent things like limit the amount of tickets or amount of tasks that are allowed in any one column at any one time. Because if you limit the amount of things that are going on in progress, you get every single thing done faster. You get that sofa out the door in 4.5 hours instead of 4.5 months. And those are the sorts of activities that you need to do. If you can't make your work visible, then you're really going to struggle to make real and genuine improvements to your overall process. So I've kind of been going through these key questions as we go, but I just wanted to leave you with these 4 key questions. So the number one question to ask, how can we make our work visible? There are lots of tools, there's lots of ways. Unfortunately, with remote work these days, a key way used to be have physical boards. If you're all remote, that's probably not going to work, so you need to go for a digital solution. But work on that, make your work visible, explain to people what you're doing. If you have something that you can go to and you can say, hey, I'd love to make that change, but let me show you where we are in our process, fundamentally, it shifts the conversation and it puts you back in control of dealing with those problems. How could we change to make our work more even? So I posed you that question earlier. But if you can think about that, challenge every single step that you go through. You may well have some really archaic approval processes. If you don't think that they're valuable, rail against them, okay? Try and get rid of things from there, even out your work. Try and put things before that cutoff point, because it makes an enormous difference, because you're reducing the complexity and you can just make it much smoother. Where are we overburdened and why? So, depending on the scale of the organization, you may have 3 or 4 people in a payroll team, and you may actually identify that a single person is actually the source of all the delays, because they've got so much work on that everything gets stuck with them. There's about 100 ways you might solve that problem. More people, you might solve it through training other people to do those activities, or you might solve it by just changing the process and doing fewer steps in what you're doing. So that's a really key question to ask. And then finally, this goes to the waste problem. What are we doing that adds no value? Okay? It's really sad to think that human beings in the 21st century, well into it, are still doing huge amounts of no value add activity. Now, I'm going to give you some really cool examples of that. Email. Okay? How much time do you lose on pointless emails that you should never have been included on? Okay? Get rid of it. Meetings. You go to a meeting, you say nothing, you learn nothing, you achieve nothing. Don't go. Be strong. We've all got to protect our time, and we've all got to achieve these results. And then any time you are doing a manual process with data, it's just a red rag to a raging bull with everyone at Cintra. We hate those things. We need to eliminate them. We've got to stop touching data and moving it around, moving files, taking them from one place to another. We have to use systems to make that happen. But this isn't just about technology. So this is a way of thinking and a way of acting that allows you to achieve these results. And I just wanted to finish, if it skipped properly, on one final thing. We're really passionate about lean payroll as a topic, and we think that there's an awful lot to learn and to teach. So we will be looking to bring out a manual on lean payroll, and we're also going to be looking to bring out a service where we help you to analyze your payroll and understand what you could do differently and how you could change the way that you do things to make the whole thing more efficient. So thank you very much for listening to me, and hope you look out for some changes in the near future with some of these things we talked about. Thank you.